The animated film Rango stands as one of the most distinctive achievements in modern animated cinema. Released in 2011, Rango was directed by Gore Verbinski and produced by Graham King, with distribution by Paramount Pictures and production support from Nickelodeon Movies. At its heart, however, the film is powered by a remarkable ensemble of voice actors and a creative team whose combined artistic instincts shaped it into something far more layered than a typical animated Western. The central performance comes from Johnny Depp, who voices Rango, a nameless pet chameleon who reinvents himself as a heroic gunslinger in the dusty desert town of Dirt. Before taking on this animated role, Depp had already established himself as one of Hollywood's most transformative performers. He was widely known for his theatrical sensibilities and eccentric character work, especially in films like Pirates of the Caribbean, where he portrayed Captain Jack Sparrow with flamboyant unpredictability. His background in music, including his work as a guitarist and performer, also contributed to his rhythmic approach to dialogue. Depp brought to Rango a nervous theatricality, blending insecurity with bravado. Instead of playing the character as a straightforward hero, he infused him with vulnerability, improvisational energy, and a slightly unhinged charm that gave the character authenticity. One of the most unusual aspects of Rango's production was that Verbinski encouraged the voice cast to perform together on physical sets rather than record in isolated booths. This approach, closer to live theater than traditional animation voice work, allowed Depp and his co-stars to physically embody their characters. Depp has often gravitated toward roles that blur performance and transformation, and this process deepened his connection to the character. Rango became less of a vocal caricature and more of a fully realized personality. The film reinforced Depp's reputation for immersive character creation and expanded his influence within animation, demonstrating that major dramatic actors could carry animated films without relying solely on broad comedic tropes. Opposite Depp is Isla Fisher, who voices Beans, the tough and resourceful desert iguana. Fisher had established her career in both comedic and dramatic roles, including Wedding Crashers and Confessions of a Shopaholic. Although not primarily known for animation at the time, she brought a grounded emotional realism to Beans. Her performance avoids turning the character into a simple love interest. Instead, Fisher's nuanced vocal delivery emphasizes Bean's resilience, loneliness, and fierce independence. This layered portrayal supports one of the film's core themes, survival in a harsh environment. For Fisher, Rango demonstrated her ability to anchor animated storytelling with subtle emotional shading rather than exaggerated cartoon energy. Another standout performance comes from Bill Nighy as Rattlesnake Jake. Nighy, renowned for his stage and screen work in both dramatic and genre films, brings a chilling gravitas to the villain. His classical theater background is evident in his measured pacing and sharp articulation. Rather than portraying Jake as loud or theatrically evil, Nighy plays him with controlled menace. His voice slithers through scenes with calculated authority, reinforcing the mythic Western tone of the film. This restrained performance elevates the antagonist into something almost legendary, echoing classic Western outlaws. The cast also includes Abigail Breslin as Priscilla, whose youthful voice adds innocence and sincerity, and Alfred Molina as Roadkill, whose eccentric comedic timing adds surreal humor. Molina, with his extensive stage experience and dramatic film roles, approaches voice acting with precision. He delivers lines with both absurdity and emotional depth, turning a minor character into a memorable presence. Ray Winstone also contributes with his gritty vocal style, reinforcing the rough Western atmosphere of Dirt. Director Gore Verbinski's influence on the film cannot be overstated. Already known for visually ambitious projects, particularly in the Pirates of the Caribbean series, Verbinski approached Rango as both homage and deconstruction of classic Westerns. He drew inspiration from films such as Once Upon a Time in the West and The Good, The Bad, and the Ugly, channeling their operatic tone into animated form. Verbinski's insistence on performance capture-style rehearsals helped blur the line between live action and animation. His background in large-scale cinematic storytelling ensured that Rango would feel epic despite being populated by reptiles and desert creatures. The screenplay was written by John Logan, whose previous credits included historical dramas and character-driven narratives. Logan brought a surprisingly philosophical layer to the story. Rather than crafting a simple children's adventure, he constructed a narrative about identity, myth-making, and self-invention. His script allows the protagonist to grapple with existential doubt, echoing themes more commonly found in adult westerns and classic literature. This narrative ambition sets Rango apart within animated filmmaking. The film's distinctive visual texture owes much to the artists at Industrial Light and Magic. Traditionally known for groundbreaking visual effects in live-action cinema, the studio applied its technical expertise to fully animated storytelling. The animators focused on minute details such as dust particles, cracked scales, and subtle eye movements, creating an unusually tactile animated world. This decision reinforced Verbinski's desire for realism within absurdity. Instead of glossy perfection, the characters appear weathered and imperfect, reflecting the harsh desert environment. The musical score was composed by Hans Zimmer, whose sweeping orchestral style enhances the film's epic tone. Zimmer blends traditional Western instrumentation with playful rhythmic motifs that underscore Rango's internal confusion. The score does not overwhelm the narrative, but subtly reinforces the mythic undertones. Zimmer's long history of collaborating with Verbinski ensured a cohesive sonic identity that matched the director's visual ambition. Producer Graham King played a significant role in supporting the unconventional approach. Known for backing ambitious cinematic projects, King helped secure the resources needed for an animated Western that defied typical studio formulas. His involvement signaled confidence in the creative risks the team was taking. Together, the voice cast and creative leaders forged a film that feels theatrical, cinematic, and intimate all at once. The decision to treat voice actors as full performers rather than disembodied narrators gave Rango emotional authenticity. Depp's central performance anchors the narrative with insecurity and imagination. Fisher adds resilience and heart, and Nye provides mythic menace. Behind them, Verbinski's direction, Logan's introspective writing, the technical mastery of Industrial Light and Magic, and Zimmer's evocative score merge into a unified artistic vision. When Rango was released in 2011, it entered a landscape of animated films that were increasingly polished, colorful, and fast-paced, often designed to appeal broadly to families while leaning heavily on slapstick humor and pop culture references. Yet Rango distinguished itself almost immediately. Directed by Gore Verbinski and distributed by Paramount Pictures, the film did not follow the conventional blueprint of contemporary animated hits. Instead of presenting a glossy fairy tale kingdom or a brightly lit suburban fantasy, it immersed audiences in a dusty, morally ambiguous Western town populated by reptiles and desert creatures. This tonal difference would become central to its cultural impact. For children who grew up in the early 2010s, Rango represented something slightly edgier than the norm. Its humor was often dry and referential, its pacing slower and more contemplative than typical animated comedies. The protagonist was not an obviously heroic figure, but an insecure chameleon who invents stories about himself to survive. This departure from the usual confident, destined hero resonated strongly with a generation navigating identity in a rapidly changing digital world. Rango struggled to define himself in an environment that demands authenticity, mirrors the experience of many young viewers growing up alongside social media, where performance and reality often blur. The film's Western aesthetic also reintroduced younger audiences to a genre that had largely faded from mainstream children's entertainment. Through visual homage to classic spaghetti westerns and American frontier cinema, Rango indirectly sparked renewed curiosity about older films. Educators and parents noted that the movie became an entry point for conversations about the mythology of the American West, storytelling traditions, and how legends are constructed. In this way, Rango served not only as entertainment, but also as a cultural bridge between generations. Among older viewers, particularly those familiar with Western cinema, Rango gained appreciation for its layered satire. Its depiction of drought-stricken dirt, ruled by a corrupt mayor hoarding water, carried thematic weight. In a time when environmental concerns and debates about resource scarcity were becoming more urgent, the film's allegorical undertones felt timely. While children might see an adventurous tale of a chameleon sheriff, Adults could interpret the story as commentary on power, manipulation, and manufactured heroism. Pop culture references within the film further amplified its reach. One notable sequence involves a mysterious figure known as the Spirit of the West, voiced by Timothy Olyphant, but visually modeled after Clint Eastwood. This meta-cinematic moment became widely discussed online. Audiences recognized it as both homage and playful parody, and clips circulated across video-sharing platforms, generating renewed conversation about Eastwood's legacy in Western storytelling. The scene demonstrated how Rango functioned on multiple cultural frequencies at once. Another memorable cultural contribution was the mariachi owl quartet that acts as a kind of musical Greek chorus throughout the film. Their recurring commentary became a fan-favorite element. Short clips of their dramatic warnings and comedic songs circulated widely, inspiring memes and parody videos. Although Rango is not structured as a traditional musical, these sequences created quotable moments that endured in online culture. Fans often reference lines about destiny and doom in humorous social media posts, embedding the film's tone into digital expression. Merchandise surrounding Rango followed a moderate but distinctive wave. Action figures, plush toys, and video game adaptations were released, but unlike more brightly colored animated franchises, Rango merchandise leaned into its gritty aesthetic. The associated video game adaptation extended the world of Dirt, allowing players to step into the sheriff's boots. While it did not reach the massive commercial heights of other animated properties, the merchandise reflected the film's commitment to its Western identity rather than softening it for mass appeal. Critically, Rango achieved a milestone by winning the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, triumphing over several high-profile competitors. This victory reinforced its cultural legitimacy and positioned it as a defining animated film of its era. The award validated the idea that animated films could be stylistically unconventional and thematically mature while still resonating with families. It also strengthened the reputation of Industrial Light and Magic as a major force in feature animation, broadening perceptions of what studios outside traditional animation giants could accomplish. Internationally, Rango's themes translated in unique ways. Audiences outside the United States connected with its universal narrative of self-discovery. While the Western setting is distinctly American, the core story about a character inventing himself in order to belong resonated across cultures. In markets throughout Europe, Asia, and Latin America, the film performed steadily, and its visual distinctiveness set it apart from other animated imports. Dubbing performances in various languages maintained the character's nervous bravado and existential uncertainty, ensuring that Rango's emotional arc remained intact. In terms of generational significance, Rango arrived during a transitional moment in animation history. Studios were experimenting with more sophisticated storytelling aimed at both children and adults. Alongside other boundary-pushing animated features of the late 2000s and early 2010s, Rango contributed to the normalization of darker visual palettes and morally complex narratives in family films. It demonstrated that children could engage with stories that did not offer immediate reassurance or simplistic moral binaries. The film also subtly influenced discussions about representation and identity. Although its characters are anthropomorphic animals, the diversity of personalities within Dirt reflects a spectrum of social roles and survival strategies. Rango's ultimate realization that he must define himself through action rather than illusion speaks to broader conversations about authenticity. In classrooms and film studies courses, the movie has been used to explore themes of performance, myth-making, and personal responsibility. Over time, Rango has maintained a steady cultural presence. Streaming platforms introduced it to younger viewers who may not have seen it in theaters, allowing new audiences to reinterpret its themes. Online retrospectives and video essays frequently revisit the film as an example of animated storytelling that resisted conformity. Its distinctive character designs and weathered textures remain instantly recognizable, setting it apart visually from the smoother, more polished styles that dominated the decade. The making of Rango was as unconventional as the film itself. From the earliest stages of development, director Gore Verbinski wanted to avoid the typical rhythm and polish associated with mainstream animated features. He envisioned a dusty, tactile Western that felt lived in rather than pristine. To achieve this, he and the production team adopted techniques that blurred the line between live-action filmmaking and animation, creating a production environment that was closer to theater rehearsal than to traditional voice recording sessions. One of the most talked about aspects of the production process was the decision to have the voice actors perform together on physical sets. Instead of isolating each performer in a sound booth, the team constructed simple props and environments so the cast could move, gesture, and interact in real time. Johnny Depp, who voiced Rango, embraced this method wholeheartedly. Known for fully immersing himself in roles, Depp treated the sessions as if he were acting in a live-action film. He wore costumes, used props, and physically embodied the nervous energy of the chameleon. This allowed animators to capture subtle movements, spontaneous improvisations, and natural chemistry between performers. The approach was not motion capture in the traditional sense. Rather than directly translating the actors' physical performances into digital models, the footage served as reference material. Animators at Industrial Light and Magic studied the recordings closely, extracting gestures, timing, and emotional nuance. This method provided a foundation of authenticity. For example, when Rango nervously shifts his weight or over-gestures during a tall tale, those physical rhythms were often inspired by Depp's real movements during rehearsal. The collaborative recording sessions also benefited actors like Isla and Bill Nighy. Fisher has spoken about how reacting directly to Depp's improvisations made her performance more grounded and spontaneous. Nighy, with his classical theater background, appreciated the ensemble dynamic. His portrayal of Rattlesnake Jake gained additional menace from the palpable tension in the room when scenes were performed collectively. Instead of imagining their co-stars' deliveries, the actors could respond in the moment, resulting in dialogue that felt unusually organic for animation. Technologically, Rango marked a milestone for Industrial Light and Magic. Traditionally associated with groundbreaking visual effects in live-action cinema, the studio ventured fully into animated feature production with this film. The challenge was immense. Verbinski wanted a world that did not look like polished plastic. He insisted on imperfections, cracked scales, dusty air, chipped wood, and uneven textures. Achieving this required innovative rendering techniques. Animators developed complex shaders to simulate the way desert light interacts with reptilian skin. Dust particles were not merely decorative but integrated into the lighting system, creating a sense of atmosphere that shifted with every movement. One particular technical challenge involved the eyes of the characters. Because reptiles have differently structured eyes than mammals, the animators had to balance biological realism with emotional readability. Too realistic, and the characters risked appearing alien and unrelatable. Too stylized, and the gritty tone would be lost. Countless iterations were tested to find the right compromise. Subtle reflections and micro-movements were added to convey inner thought, especially during Rango's moments of self-doubt. Story development was equally complex. Early drafts of the script by John Logan explored different narrative angles, including darker thematic threads and alternate endings. Some early concepts emphasized surreal humor even more heavily, while others leaned further into traditional Western tropes. Balancing existential comedy with family accessibility required multiple rewrites. The team continually refined the arc so that Rango's transformation from delusional dreamer to genuine hero felt earned rather than abrupt. There were also deleted concepts that never made it to the final cut. At one stage, additional dream sequences were considered, expanding on Rango's theatrical fantasies. These sequences would have further blurred the line between imagination and reality. However, pacing concerns led to their removal. Verbinski ultimately prioritized narrative momentum over excessive surreal detours. Another behind-the-scenes anecdote involves the character design process. Instead of making the animals conventionally cute, the artists deliberately exaggerated imperfections. Dirt is populated by creatures with crooked teeth, scars, and weathered skin. Early test audiences were reportedly surprised by the rough aesthetic. Yet Verbinski remained committed to authenticity. He believed the harshness of the environment should be visible on every face. This commitment shaped the final look of the film and distinguished it from other animated releases of the time. The score by Hans Zimmer was developed in close collaboration with the director. Rather than composing a purely comedic soundtrack, Zimmer crafted a sweeping Western-inspired soundscape. Live instrumentation blended with playful rhythmic motifs that mirrored Rango's internal chaos. Recording sessions included experimentation with unconventional percussion to evoke the dryness and tension of the desert. The Mariachi Owl Quartet sequences required tight coordination between composers, storyboard artists, and animators to ensure that visual timing matched musical cues perfectly. One particularly intricate sequence was the high-speed road chase, involving a hawk attack. Animating the swirling dust, chaotic movement, and shifting perspectives demanded months of refinement. Storyboards were revised repeatedly to maintain clarity amid the visual frenzy. Animators studied real footage of birds of prey and desert storms to create believable motion. The final scene combines slapstick humor with genuine suspense, showcasing the technical ambition of the project. Throughout development, collaboration was constant. Storyboard artists met frequently with writers to adjust dialogue based on visual discoveries. Animators suggested subtle character beats that influenced later script tweaks. This iterative process reflected Verbinski's desire for fluid creativity rather than rigid hierarchy. Every department contributed ideas, shaping the film collectively. Production was not without its challenges. Budget constraints required careful allocation of resources, particularly given the complexity of the rendering technology. Balancing artistic risk with studio expectations also created tension. However, the team's shared commitment to crafting something distinctive sustained momentum. Rango unfolds as a layered narrative that blends classic Western mythology with a deeply personal story about identity and self-invention. Directed by Gore Verbinski and written by John Logan, the film carefully balances absurd humor, existential reflection, and genre homage. Its structure follows many elements of the traditional hero's journey, yet it subverts expectations by centering on a protagonist who begins not as a chosen hero but as a delusional outsider performing a role. The film opens with Rango alone in a glass terrarium, performing dramatic monologues with improvised props. This introductory sequence establishes both tone and theme. Rango is theatrical, imaginative, and completely disconnected from the real world. He invents elaborate stories about bravery and romance, yet there is no audience. This framing device immediately signals that the story will explore the tension between illusion and reality. When an accident throws him from a moving car into the desert, the narrative-inciting incident propels him from controlled fantasy into an unpredictable environment. His arrival in the desert marks the beginning of the first act's transformation. Disoriented and desperate, he encounters Beans, voiced by Isla, who leads him toward the struggling town of Dirt. Dirt functions as both setting and metaphor. Plagued by drought and fear, the town embodies scarcity not only of water, but of hope. The pacing during these early scenes allows the audience to absorb the dusty atmosphere and eccentric inhabitants. Humor is woven into nearly every interaction, yet beneath the comedy lies genuine tension about survival. The first major turning point occurs when Rango accidentally kills a hawk threatening the townsfolk. Through coincidence rather than courage, he becomes an instant legend. In a classic Western twist, he adopts the persona of a fearless gunslinger, inventing exaggerated stories about his past. The townspeople, desperate for a hero, accept the myth. This moment crystallizes the film's central narrative engine. Rango's lie becomes his identity. He is appointed sheriff, placing him in a position of authority he has not earned. The second act deepens the conflict. As sheriff, Rango attempts to maintain the illusion of bravery while investigating the mysterious disappearance of the town's water supply. The pacing alternates between comedic beats and mounting suspense. Interrogation scenes, awkward attempts at leadership, and interactions with the intimidating rattlesnake Jake, voiced by Bill Nighy, build tension. Jake represents the embodiment of authentic Western menace, a figure who exposes Rango's facade with a single stare. His presence raises the stakes and challenges Rango's self-constructed persona. Midway through the film, the narrative shifts into darker territory. Rango's investigation reveals corruption at the highest level of Dirt's leadership. The mayor's manipulation of the water supply introduces a political dimension to the story. This revelation functions as a midpoint reversal. Rango is no longer simply protecting a town from external threats. He must confront systemic deceit. However, his lack of genuine courage becomes increasingly apparent. The emotional low point arrives when Rattlesnake Jake publicly humiliates Rango, forcing him to flee the town. Stripped of his badge and his audience, he wanders the desert alone. This sequence slows the pacing significantly, creating space for introspection. Visually sparse and tonally quiet, the desert exile mirrors the emptiness he once felt inside the terrarium. It is here that the narrative approaches existential territory. Rango encounters the mysterious spirit of the West, a metafictional figure who challenges him to understand that identity is not about performance, but about choice. This encounter marks the beginning of the third act transformation. Unlike many animated protagonists who discover hidden powers or receive magical assistance, Rango gains only clarity. He realizes that being a hero is less about reputation and more about action. The climactic return to Dirt is not accompanied by grand spectacle at first, but by quiet resolve. He re-enters the town prepared to confront both the mayor and Rattlesnake Jake, not with bravado but with honesty. The final act escalates into a showdown that blends Western tropes with animated absurdity. Action sequences unfold with dynamic pacing, yet the emotional focus remains on Rango's internal shift. When he outmaneuvers his opponents, it is not through exaggerated strength, but through intelligence and courage. The resolution restores water to Dirt and dismantles corrupt leadership, but more importantly, it validates Rango's transformation from actor to authentic participant in his own story. Throughout the narrative, comedic beats serve as rhythmic counterpoints to dramatic tension. Quick visual gags, eccentric side characters, and dry dialogue prevent the tone from becoming overly heavy. However, the humor rarely undercuts emotional stakes. Instead, it reinforces the absurdity of myth-making. Musical interludes by the Mariachi Owl Quartet function as narrative commentary, foreshadowing danger and heightening drama much like a Greek chorus. The film's structure deliberately echoes classic Western storytelling while simultaneously deconstructing it. Traditional Westerns often revolve around solitary heroes who bring order to chaotic towns. Rango begins as a parody of this archetype, yet by the end he inhabits it sincerely. This layered progression allows both children and adults to engage with the story on different levels. Younger viewers may focus on the adventure and slapstick, while older audiences appreciate the commentary on performance and identity. Pacing plays a crucial role in maintaining this balance. Action sequences are interspersed with quieter, reflective moments, ensuring emotional depth. The desert exile, in particular, slows the narrative to allow contemplation before the final confrontation. This structural decision distinguishes Rango from more relentlessly fast-paced animated films. Ultimately, the narrative arc of Rango is not about defeating villains alone, but about confronting self-deception. The storyline unfolds as a journey from illusion to authenticity, framed within the dusty iconography of the American West. By integrating genre homage with introspective storytelling, the film crafts a plot that appeals to children seeking adventure and to adults drawn to philosophical undercurrents. It is this careful narrative construction that gives Rango its lasting resonance. At its core, Rango is a story about identity, but unlike many animated tales that frame identity as something hidden waiting to be discovered, this film presents it as something constructed, performed, and ultimately chosen. Directed by Gore Verbinski and written by John Logan, the narrative operates on multiple thematic layers, allowing younger audiences to enjoy an adventurous Western while inviting older viewers to reflect on deeper philosophical questions. The most prominent theme is self-acceptance. Rango begins the story as a nameless chameleon living in isolation, literally enclosed in glass. His terrarium existence represents safety without purpose. He creates elaborate fantasies in which he plays heroic roles, suggesting that even before his physical journey begins, he is grappling with insecurity. He does not know who he is without an audience. When he is thrown into the desert and arrives in the town of dirt, he sees an opportunity to become someone meaningful. However, instead of discovering his true self immediately, he invents one. This invention speaks to a broader commentary on performance. Rango adopts the persona of a fearless gunslinger because the town needs a hero. In doing so, the film explores how societies often construct myths around individuals to satisfy collective fears. Dirt is suffering from drought and desperation. Its citizens are not merely looking for protection, they are looking for hope. Rango's fabricated legend becomes a symbol of that hope. Yet the moral message is clear. Confidence built on deception cannot sustain itself. The theme of courage evolves gradually. At first, Rango confuses storytelling with bravery. He believes that if he repeats his fictional achievements convincingly enough, they will become reality. His arc reveals that courage is not about the absence of fear, but about acting despite it. When he is exposed and humiliated by Rattlesnake Jake, voiced by Bill Nighy, he experiences the collapse of his constructed identity. This moment is essential because it strips away illusion. Only when he stands alone in the desert, without an audience or a title, does he confront the truth about himself. The film also addresses destiny versus choice. In many animated adventures, protagonists are told they are special or destined for greatness. Rango, however, receives no prophecy. When he meets the mysterious spirit of the West, a symbolic figure representing mythic storytelling, he is not granted power. Instead, he is reminded that stories are shaped by decisions. This encounter reframes destiny as an active process rather than a predetermined path. The moral lesson emphasizes agency. Identity is not discovered passively, it is forged through action. Friendship and community form another central theme. Dirt is not portrayed as an idyllic town, but as a fragile ecosystem. Every character depends on the limited water supply, making survival a collective effort. When Rango initially assumes the role of sheriff, he seeks admiration rather than connection. Over time, especially through his interactions with Beans, voiced by Isla, he begins to understand responsibility. Beans herself embodies resilience and practicality. Her skepticism toward Rango's exaggerated claims serves as a grounding force. Through her, the narrative highlights trust as something earned rather than declared. Environmental awareness subtly underpins the story. The scarcity of water in dirt is not merely a plot device but a metaphor for resource management and ethical leadership. The mayor's manipulation of the town's supply reflects the dangers of greed and corruption. While the film does not preach overtly, it suggests that power concentrated in the hands of the self-interested leads to collective suffering. This moral thread resonates with contemporary conversations about environmental stewardship and equitable distribution of resources. Another key theme is the relationship between illusion and truth. Rango's theatrical personality is not entirely negative. His imagination allows him to survive emotionally. Storytelling becomes both shield and weapon. However, the narrative insists that stories must eventually align with reality. Authenticity requires vulnerability. When Rango returns to dirt for the final confrontation, he no longer relies on exaggerated tales. He acts with clarity, accepting that failure is possible. This shift demonstrates maturity. The film balances its heavier themes with humor and absurdity, making the lessons accessible without becoming didactic. The Mariachi Owl Quartet, functioning as a comedic chorus, often foreshadows doom while maintaining levity. Their presence underscores the idea that life itself can feel like a staged performance. Yet beneath the humor lies the recognition that individuals must step beyond performance to engage meaningfully with their circumstances. For younger audiences, the moral messages operate in straightforward ways. Be honest. Be brave. Help your community. For older viewers, the film invites reflection on identity in a performative society. In a world increasingly shaped by digital personas and curated self-presentation, Rango's journey from illusion to authenticity carries particular relevance. It suggests that reinvention is not inherently false, but it must be grounded in genuine commitment. Love in Rango is understated but present. The relationship between Rango and Beans is not framed as a conventional romantic subplot. Instead, it represents mutual respect and partnership. Their connection grows from shared struggle rather than immediate attraction. This portrayal reinforces the theme that meaningful bonds develop through trust and collaboration. Sacrifice also emerges subtly. When Rango chooses to confront the corrupt system controlling Dirt's water, he risks not only his life, but also his fragile sense of self. He could have remained in obscurity, returning to isolated fantasy. Instead, he chooses engagement. This decision reflects the film's ultimate moral stance. Fulfillment arises from participation in community, not from detached performance. In the end, Rango presents freedom not as escape, but as responsibility. The desert initially appears vast and indifferent, a space of isolation. By the conclusion, it becomes a landscape where agency matters. Rango earns his place not because he was destined for greatness, but because he chose to act courageously. One of the most striking aspects of Rango is its visual identity. From the first frame, the film announces that it will not resemble the glossy, brightly saturated worlds commonly associated with mainstream animated features of its era. Directed by Gore Verbinski and brought to life by the artists at Industrial Light and Magic, Rango embraces a dusty, weathered aesthetic that mirrors the harshness of its desert setting. This commitment to texture and imperfection shapes not only the look of the film but also its emotional tone. The animation style leans heavily into realism while still preserving expressive exaggeration. The characters are reptiles, rodents, and birds, yet they are not softened into conventionally cute forms. Instead, their scales are cracked, their skin creased, and their clothing worn. Dirt clings to every surface. This visual roughness reinforces the narrative's themes of survival and scarcity. The town of Dirt does not feel like a stage set for comedy. It feels like a struggling frontier settlement barely holding itself together. The color palette plays a crucial role in establishing atmosphere. Warm earth tones dominate the frame. Sandy browns, muted greens, and faded oranges evoke the dryness of the desert. Rather than relying on bright primaries, the film uses desaturated hues that create a sense of heat and age. During moments of tension, the lighting becomes sharper, casting elongated shadows that echo classic Western cinematography. In quieter scenes, softer golden light suggests fragile hope. This careful manipulation of color and light allows the environment itself to communicate emotion. Lighting in Rango is particularly sophisticated. The animators sought to replicate the behavior of real desert sunlight. Harsh overhead beams create stark contrasts, illuminating particles of dust suspended in the air. Reflections on reptilian skin are subtle but deliberate, emphasizing texture. Night scenes are not overly dark, but bathed in cool blue tones that contrast with the daytime heat. These shifts in lighting underscore narrative transitions, guiding the viewer's emotional response without overt exposition. Character design reflects personality as much as species. Rango, voiced by Johnny Depp, is lanky and slightly awkward in proportion. His large eyes and constantly shifting posture visually communicate insecurity. His body language often appears slightly off balance, reinforcing his internal uncertainty. As he grows more confident, his stance becomes steadier, his movements more deliberate. This subtle physical evolution mirrors his psychological journey. Beans, voiced by Isla, is designed with sharper lines and a firm posture. Her clothing, including a worn Western outfit, signals practicality and resilience. Her eyes are intense and focused, conveying determination. Even small details, such as the way she handles tools or reins, communicate competence. Without lengthy dialogue, the audience understands her strength through visual cues. Rattlesnake Jake, voiced by Bill Nighy, exemplifies how design can amplify menace. His elongated body coils with controlled precision. The rattle on his tail resembles a weapon, reinforcing his lethal presence. Shadows often partially obscure his face, enhancing mystery. The animators paid careful attention to the fluidity of his movement, studying real snake locomotion to ensure authenticity while heightening dramatic effect. His entrance scenes are framed with deliberate cinematic flair, echoing the iconic introductions of Western villains. Environmental design contributes significantly to world building. Dirt is constructed with crooked wooden buildings, peeling paint, and uneven foundations. Nothing appears symmetrical or polished. Signs are weather-beaten, windows dusty. This asymmetry adds realism and suggests history. Viewers can imagine years of struggle etched into every structure. The town feels inhabited long before Rango arrives. Beyond the town, the desert landscape expands with sweeping vistas and towering rock formations. Wide shots emphasize isolation, reinforcing Rango's smallness within a vast world. During action sequences, the camera movement mimics live-action cinematography, sweeping low across sand dunes or tilting upward to reveal looming threats. This dynamic framing enhances immersion and aligns the film visually with classic Western epics. Technological innovation underpins this visual achievement. Industrial light and magic developed advanced rendering techniques to handle complex textures and lighting interactions. The simulation of dust was particularly challenging. Particles needed to respond realistically to movement, wind, and light without overwhelming the frame. This attention to atmospheric detail creates depth and dimensionality rarely seen in animated features at the time. Facial animation in Rango balances realism with expressiveness. Reptilian anatomy poses unique challenges, as traditional mammalian expressions do not translate directly. The animators compensated by emphasizing subtle muscle shifts around the eyes and mouth. Micro-expressions convey doubt, fear, or resolve. During moments of introspection, the camera often lingers on Rango's face, allowing small changes in his gaze to communicate internal conflict. Visual symbolism is woven throughout the film. The terrarium at the beginning represents confinement and artificial identity. Its clean glass contrasts sharply with the gritty textures of the desert. Water, scarce and precious, gleams whenever it appears, drawing the viewer's eye. The badge Rango receives as sheriff shines initially, symbolizing borrowed authority. Later, when his confidence falters, that shine feels fragile. Movement also communicates character. Rango's early gestures are exaggerated and theatrical, matching his storytelling persona. As he matures, his motions become restrained and purposeful. Beans moves with efficiency, rarely wasting energy. Jake's movements are economical and predatory, heightening tension even in stillness. The film's visual storytelling does not rely heavily on exposition. Instead, environment and design convey context. Cracked earth signals drought more powerfully than dialogue. Crowded saloons and anxious glances illustrate community fear. By trusting imagery to carry narrative weight, the film respects its audience's interpretive ability. Stylistically, Rango draws influence from classic Western cinema while translating those visual conventions into animated form. Low-angle shots emphasize authority. Extreme close-ups capture tension before showdowns. Sweeping horizon lines frame moments of solitude. These choices anchor the fantastical animal cast within a cinematic tradition, reinforcing the film's homage to genre history. Music and sound play a vital role in shaping the identity of Rango. Although the film is not structured as a traditional animated musical filled with large-scale production numbers, its score and soundscape are deeply woven into the narrative fabric. Composed by Hans Zimmer, the music functions as both emotional undercurrent and genre homage, reinforcing the Western tone while reflecting the internal journey of the protagonist. Zimmer approached Rango not as a light-hearted cartoon but as an epic Western filtered through absurdity. Rather than relying on overly whimsical orchestration, he incorporated traditional Western instrumentation, including acoustic guitars, trumpets, and rhythmic percussion that evokes the sound of spurs and desert wind. The result is a score that feels expansive and cinematic. It pays tribute to classic frontier soundtracks while maintaining a playful edge that matches the film's humor. One of the most distinctive musical elements in the film is the recurring mariachi owl quartet. These owls serve as a kind of musical chorus, appearing at key narrative moments to comment on Rango's fate. Their presence recalls theatrical traditions in which music frames the story and foreshadows events. Their songs are brief, but memorable, blending humor with dramatic exaggeration. They warn of impending doom in tones that are both ominous and comedic, heightening tension while inviting laughter. The integration of the mariachi demonstrates how music in Rango supports storytelling without overwhelming it. Instead of interrupting the narrative with extended musical numbers, the film uses short interludes that enhance pacing. These sequences often arrive at transitional points, marking shifts in emotional direction. For example, when Rango's confidence begins to falter, the owl's melodies adopt a darker tone, signaling that the myth he has constructed is beginning to unravel. Beyond these vocal moments, Zimmer's background score carefully tracks Rango's internal transformation. Early in the film, the music accompanying Rango's exaggerated stories carries a slightly theatrical flourish, echoing his dramatic imagination. The instrumentation feels playful and slightly inflated, mirroring his self-invented heroism. As he confronts real danger, however, the score shifts toward a more grounded and tense arrangement. Strings tighten, percussion sharpens, and the tempo slows during moments of doubt. During action sequences, such as the chaotic desert chase involving a hawk, the music accelerates into high-energy rhythms. Brass instruments punctuate sudden turns and near misses, creating a sense of urgency. Yet, even amid fast-paced movement, the score retains clarity. It never becomes chaotic noise. Instead, it guides the viewer's attention, accentuating both physical peril and comedic timing. The confrontation scenes featuring Rattlesnake Jake, voiced by Bill Nighy, are underscored by sparse, tension-filled motifs. Low strings and minimal percussion create a sense of coiled threat. Silence is often used strategically before Jake speaks, allowing his voice to dominate the soundscape. This restraint amplifies his presence. Rather than layering heavy music over his dialogue, the film trusts the weight of his delivery and the ambient desert sounds to carry the moment. Sound design in Rango extends far beyond music. The ambient noises of the desert environment are meticulously crafted. Wind whistles through wooden structures. Sand shifts underfoot. Distant creaks and rattles echo across empty streets. These subtle details build immersion. The town of dirt feels alive not because of constant motion but because of the layered sounds that suggest unseen activity. Water, as a central symbol in the narrative, is given particular sonic attention. When droplets fall or containers open, the sound is crisp and resonant. This auditory emphasis reinforces water's value within the story. Its presence is not taken for granted. The contrast between the dry hush of the desert and the clarity of flowing water deepens the thematic focus on scarcity and survival. The voice performances themselves are integral to the film's soundscape. Johnny Depp delivers Rango's dialogue with rhythmic variation, shifting from rapid nervous chatter to quiet introspection. His vocal tone evolves subtly across the film. Early on, his speech carries exaggerated swagger. Later, it softens, reflecting self-awareness. This evolution is not only a matter of acting but also of sound mixing. Engineers ensured that his voice blended seamlessly with environmental effects and music, maintaining emotional coherence. Beans, voiced by Isla Fisher, brings a steady vocal presence that contrasts with Rango's volatility. Her dialogue is often accompanied by lighter instrumental textures, suggesting resilience and grounding. The interplay between their voices, set against the sparse desert ambience, reinforces their growing partnership. The climactic sequences combine score and sound design in layered harmony. As Rango prepares to confront corruption and reclaim his identity, the music swells gradually. Yet it never overpowers the realism of the setting. Gunshots echo sharply, boots scrape against sand, and silence punctuates moments of tension. This balance between orchestral grandeur and tactile sound effects ensures that the emotional stakes feel authentic rather than exaggerated. Another noteworthy element is the film's use of silence. In several introspective scenes, particularly during Rango's exile in the desert, music recedes almost entirely. The absence of sound emphasizes isolation. Wind becomes the dominant auditory presence. This restraint underscores the character's vulnerability more effectively than dramatic scoring would have. Zimmer's collaboration with director Gore Verbinski was essential in achieving tonal balance. Both shared an appreciation for Western genre traditions. Rather than parodying those traditions musically, they honored them while allowing humor to emerge organically. The score respects the mythic grandeur of the frontier even as the characters subvert it. In the broader context of animated cinema, Rango's musical approach stands out for its maturity. It does not rely on catchy pop songs designed for radio play. Instead, it invests in atmosphere and narrative cohesion. This choice reinforces the film's distinct identity and aligns it more closely with live-action Western epics than with conventional family musicals. When Rango was released in 2011, it entered a competitive landscape of animated features dominated by brightly colored franchises and familiar storytelling formulas. Yet from the beginning, the film stood apart. Directed by Gore Verbinski and produced with the support of Paramount Pictures and Nickelodeon Movies, Rango generated immediate discussion because of its unusual tone, textured visual style, and genre-bending narrative. Critical response was largely positive, with many reviewers praising the film's ambition. Critics frequently noted that Rango did not treat its young audience condescendingly. Instead of relying solely on fast-paced gags and sentimental messages, it presented a layered story filled with references to classic Western cinema. Reviewers appreciated the depth of its screenplay by John Logan, which balanced absurd humor with existential undertones. The film's willingness to embrace moral ambiguity and introspection distinguished it from other animated releases of the time. One of the most celebrated aspects of the film was its visual design. The animation work by Industrial Light and Magic received widespread acclaim. Many critics highlighted the textured realism of the desert environment and the unconventional character designs. Instead of polished, symmetrical faces, the inhabitants of Dirt were rough and imperfect. This stylistic boldness was seen as refreshing, even daring. Some reviewers described the film as one of the most visually distinctive animated features of its decade. The voice performances also earned strong praise. Johnny Depp was widely recognized for bringing nuance and vulnerability to Rango. Critics noted that his performance avoided the exaggerated cartoon tone common in animation. Instead, he delivered a layered portrayal of insecurity masked by bravado. Isla Fisher was commended for grounding the story emotionally through her portrayal of Beans. Meanwhile, Bill Nighy was frequently singled out for creating a chilling and memorable villain in Rattlesnake Jake. Commercially, Rango performed solidly at the box office. While it did not break records on the scale of some animated juggernauts, it achieved strong international earnings and demonstrated that audiences were willing to embrace an unconventional animated Western. Its financial success reinforced the idea that family films could experiment with genre without alienating viewers. The film's most significant institutional recognition came when it won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. This victory was particularly notable because it triumphed over several high-profile competitors. The award signaled industry acknowledgement of its artistic ambition and technical achievement. It also validated the decision to entrust an animated project to a studio better known for visual effects in live-action cinema. However, Rango was not without criticism. Some parents expressed concern that the film's tone was darker and more intense than typical animated fare. Scenes involving gunplay, threatening villains, and existential reflection prompted debate about age appropriateness. While many children responded positively to the humor and adventure, others found certain moments frightening. The portrayal of Rattlesnake Jake, in particular, was described by some as genuinely menacing. A smaller segment of critics argued that the film's pacing occasionally lagged, especially during introspective sequences in the desert. These viewers felt that younger audiences might struggle with a slower, contemplative rhythm. Yet others countered that this pacing was integral to the film's thematic depth. The quieter moments allowed the protagonist's internal conflict to unfold naturally. There were also discussions about the film's engagement with Western iconography. Some commentators analyzed its homage to classic frontier narratives and questioned how those myths intersect with contemporary perspectives. The appearance of a Spirit of the West figure modeled after traditional cinematic cowboys sparked conversation about nostalgia and reinterpretation. For many, this self-awareness was a strength, adding layers of meta-commentary. For others, it was an unexpected complexity in a family-oriented film. Despite these debates, audience reception remained broadly enthusiastic. Children often connected with Rango's comedic missteps and exaggerated storytelling, while adults appreciated the philosophical undertones. Over time, the film developed a reputation as an underrated gem within animated cinema. Streaming platforms introduced it to new viewers, and retrospective essays frequently revisited it as a bold departure from formula. Within the animation community, Rango was viewed as a milestone for industrial light and magic. The studio's successful transition from live-action visual effects to full-scale animated storytelling expanded perceptions of what it could achieve. Animators and filmmakers cited the film as evidence that textured realism and mature themes could coexist with family accessibility. The film's award recognition extended beyond the Academy. It received nominations and wins from various critics' associations and animation guilds, further cementing its status. These accolades reflected appreciation not only for its storytelling but also for its technical innovation and sound design, including the score by Hans Zimmer. In retrospect, Rango's reception reveals a film that challenged expectations. It was neither a conventional children's comedy nor a purely adult satire. Instead, it occupied a space in between. This hybridity initially sparked debate, but ultimately contributed to its enduring appeal. Viewers who revisited the film years later often reported discovering new layers of meaning, suggesting that its impact grows with age. Criticism surrounding its darker elements gradually softened as audiences became more accustomed to animated films exploring complex themes. In the context of evolving animation trends, Rango now appears ahead of its time rather than out of place. Its willingness to trust viewers with ambiguity and imperfection is often cited as one of its defining strengths. In the years following its release in 2011, Rango developed a reputation as a singular achievement in animated cinema. Directed by Gore Verbinski and produced with the backing of Paramount Pictures and Nickelodeon Movies, the film did not initially launch a sprawling franchise in the way many animated hits aim to do. Instead, its legacy has been defined by artistic influence and long-term appreciation rather than rapid sequel production. This distinction has shaped how Rango is remembered within animation history. Unlike many family films that immediately generate follow-ups, Rango remained a standalone story. There were early conversations about the possibility of a sequel, particularly after the film achieved strong box office performance and won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. However, no direct sequel materialized. This absence of continuation contributed to the film's almost mythic quality. It exists as a self-contained narrative arc, complete and resolved, which has allowed it to retain its identity without dilution. That said, Rango did extend beyond the screen in limited ways. A video game adaptation was released alongside the film, expanding the world of Dirt and allowing players to step into the boots of the unlikely sheriff. While the game did not reach blockbuster status, it reinforced the film's distinctive Western tone and introduced younger audiences to interactive storytelling within the same universe. This cross-media presence hinted at franchise potential, even if it was never fully realized through sequels. Merchandising also accompanied the film's release. Action figures, plush toys, and themed apparel appeared in stores, though the product line remained modest compared to larger animated brands. The character designs, with their rough textures and unconventional proportions, did not easily translate into the brightly colored toy aisles typically associated with children's entertainment. Yet this very uniqueness preserved the authenticity of the property. Rango was never softened excessively for commercial purposes, which in retrospect strengthened its artistic legacy. Within the broader context of animated filmmaking, Rango's legacy is closely tied to industrial light and magic. Traditionally known for visual effects in live-action films, the studio demonstrated through Rango that it could carry a fully animated feature with distinctive style and technical innovation. The film's success broadened industry perceptions of what studios outside the traditional animation powerhouses could accomplish. It stands as a landmark project that expanded creative possibilities within digital animation. The film also holds a lasting place within the career of Johnny Depp. Although he was already a globally recognized star, his performance as Rango reinforced his ability to anchor an animated film through voice alone. Unlike many animated projects that rely heavily on celebrity recognition for marketing, Rango required Depp to build a character defined more by vulnerability than flamboyance. The film remains one of his most distinctive voice acting roles, and it is often cited as an example of how major live-action actors can successfully transition into animation without sacrificing depth. For director Gore Verbinski, Rango occupies a unique position within his body of work. Known for large-scale live-action epics, he used animation to explore genre homage and existential themes in ways that might have been more difficult within conventional Western filmmaking. The film's self-awareness and philosophical undertones reflect his interest in myth-making and storytelling itself. As such, Rango has become a reference point when discussing his creative range. Although no television series or stage musical adaptation followed, the film's legacy continued through critical reevaluation and streaming exposure. As new generations discovered it online, Rango gained recognition as an animated feature ahead of its time. Video essays and film analyses frequently revisit it as an example of mature storytelling within family cinema. This steady resurgence has cemented its reputation as a cult favorite among animation enthusiasts. Theme park adaptations did not emerge on the scale seen with other animated franchises. However, the film's Western aesthetic aligns naturally with certain themed entertainment environments. Temporary attractions and promotional events during its release period featured desert set designs and interactive experiences inspired by dirt. While these installations were short-lived, they contributed to the immersive identity surrounding the film at the time. In terms of brand influence, Rango demonstrated that animated features did not need to rely on fairy tale princesses or toy-based concepts to succeed. It proved that genre pastiche, existential humor, and textured realism could attract family audiences. This lesson echoed in later animated projects that experimented with darker palettes and morally complex narratives. While Rango did not spawn imitators in direct form, its spirit can be felt in films that embrace unconventional settings and layered themes. Academically and critically, Rango has endured as a case study in genre adaptation within animation. Its blending of spaghetti Western tropes with anthropomorphic characters challenges traditional boundaries. Film scholars often cite it when discussing the evolution of animated storytelling in the early 21st century. Its Academy Award win further solidified its standing as a legitimate artistic achievement rather than a novelty. The absence of sequels or spin-offs may initially appear as a missed opportunity. Yet this very restraint has preserved the film's integrity. Without an extended franchise, Rango remains a singular statement. Its narrative arc concludes definitively, reinforcing the idea that some stories achieve greater impact through completion rather than perpetual expansion. Over time, its legacy has shifted from commercial metrics to cultural respect. Audiences who revisit the film frequently remark on its depth, humor, and visual ambition. Children who first watched it upon release have grown into adults who now appreciate its philosophical undercurrents. This generational maturation has deepened its resonance. Rango resonates with audiences because it speaks to something deeply human, the desire to belong and the fear of being exposed as inadequate. Directed by Gore Verbinski and written by John Logan, the film presents a protagonist who begins as uncertain, performs confidence, and gradually learns to act with authenticity. This emotional arc allows viewers of different ages to connect with the story in distinct but complementary ways. Children often respond first to the humor and adventure. Rango's exaggerated storytelling, physical comedy, and expressive movements create immediate entertainment. His nervous energy, voiced by Johnny Depp, makes him both funny and relatable. Young viewers recognize his insecurity even if they do not consciously analyze it. They see a character trying to impress others, making mistakes, and learning from them. This mirrors common childhood experiences of fitting in at school, joining new groups, or attempting to appear confident in unfamiliar situations. Beans, portrayed by Isla Fisher, also provides emotional grounding for younger audiences. Her independence and determination show that strength does not require loudness. Children who watch her character can see an example of resilience without aggression. Her interactions with Rango illustrate cooperation and trust, reinforcing the idea that friendships form through shared effort rather than superficial admiration. For adult viewers, the film often carries a different layer of meaning. The themes of identity and performance can feel especially relevant in modern life. Rango's tendency to construct elaborate stories about himself reflects broader cultural behaviors, particularly in a society shaped by social media and public image. Adults may interpret his journey as a metaphor for navigating authenticity in environments that reward spectacle. The moment when his false identity collapses can feel emotionally powerful because it echoes real-world experiences of vulnerability and reinvention. The presence of Rattlesnake Jake, voiced by Bill Nighy, adds to this cross-generational resonance. For younger viewers, Jake is a visually intimidating antagonist whose design and voice create suspense. For adults, his character recalls classic Western villains and genre traditions. His controlled demeanor and mythic presence invite comparison to cinematic outlaws, making his confrontations with Rango feel both playful and symbolic. Fan communities around Rango may not be as large as those surrounding more franchise-driven animated properties, yet the film has cultivated a dedicated audience. Online discussions frequently revisit its philosophical undertones and visual style. Video essays analyze its commentary on storytelling and myth-making. This sustained engagement demonstrates that emotional connection does not require sequels or expansive universes. Sometimes a single well-crafted narrative is enough to inspire lasting appreciation. Cosplay at conventions occasionally features characters from the film, particularly Rango himself. Fans recreate his sheriff attire and distinctive appearance, celebrating his transformation from insecure performer to genuine leader. This creative expression reflects identification with his journey. The costume becomes symbolic not only of the character, but of the personal growth he represents. Music also contributes to emotional attachment. The score composed by Hans Zimmer enhances key scenes in ways that linger in memory. Even viewers who cannot recall specific plot details often remember the atmosphere created by the music. The mariachi-inspired interludes, delivered by the Owl Quartet within the story, become cultural touchpoints. Their dramatic warnings and rhythmic performances add texture, making moments feel theatrical and heightened. Children who grow up with the film sometimes revisit it years later and discover new layers of meaning. What once felt like simple adventure may reveal deeper reflections on responsibility and courage. This rewatch experience strengthens generational resonance. The film matures alongside its audience. As viewers age, they may better appreciate Rango's struggle to distinguish between storytelling and truth. Parents who watch the film with their children often find themselves engaging in conversations about honesty and leadership. The narrative invites discussion about why Rango's fabricated persona eventually fails and how his willingness to confront reality allows him to grow. These conversations enhance the shared viewing experience, transforming entertainment into dialogue. The desert setting itself contributes to emotional impact. Its vastness can evoke feelings of isolation, particularly during Rango's exile. Viewers may sense his loneliness when he stands alone against the horizon. This visual simplicity allows emotional themes to surface clearly. Without excessive visual clutter, the story emphasizes internal transformation. Another aspect of audience connection lies in the film's humor. Its comedic timing works on multiple levels. Slapstick moments entertain children immediately, while subtle references to classic Western cinema reward attentive adults. This layered humor ensures that different viewers laugh for different reasons, yet share the same scene. The film's willingness to present moral ambiguity also strengthens resonance. Characters are not strictly good or evil in simplistic terms. Even Rango himself begins as a flawed figure. This complexity encourages empathy. Audiences can see parts of themselves in his uncertainty. The message that growth involves mistakes makes the story emotionally accessible. Over time, Rango has maintained relevance through streaming platforms and digital availability. New generations encounter it outside the context of theatrical release. This accessibility broadens its audience and supports ongoing discovery. Young viewers who may not have experienced its initial debut can still form strong attachments to its characters. The absence of an extended franchise does not diminish emotional connection. In fact, it may enhance it. Because the story concludes definitively, audiences can appreciate it as a complete journey. There is satisfaction in witnessing Rango's transformation from isolated performer to responsible leader without needing further continuation. Ultimately, the generational resonance of Rango lies in its honesty about identity. Children see adventure and humor. Teenagers may recognize themes of self-expression and belonging. Adults may reflect on authenticity and leadership. Across these perspectives, the film remains unified by its central message: courage grows when illusion gives way to action. The strength of Rango lies not only in its visual style and genre homage, but in the careful construction of its characters and the way they reflect classic narrative archetypes. Directed by Gore Verbinski and written by John Logan, the film uses familiar storytelling structures while reshaping them for a modern audience. At the center stands a protagonist whose journey mirrors the traditional hero's path, yet who begins in a place of uncertainty rather than destiny. The main character, Rango, functions as both trickster and reluctant hero. At the beginning of the story, he is not defined by bravery but by performance. He invents identities to entertain himself, displaying traits commonly associated with the archetype of the storyteller or shapeshifter. In mythic traditions, the shapeshifter often represents adaptability and transformation. Rango embodies this concept literally as a chameleon, an animal capable of changing appearance. Symbolically, this trait reflects his internal instability. He shifts personas because he has not yet discovered a grounded sense of self. His internal conflict centers on insecurity. He fears insignificance. This fear drives him to exaggerate his experiences when he arrives in the town of dirt. Rather than admitting ignorance, he constructs a heroic narrative. This behavior aligns with the archetype of the false hero, a figure who claims status without earning it. However, unlike purely negative versions of this archetype, Rango is not malicious. His deception stems from longing rather than greed. This distinction allows audiences to empathize with him even during his mistakes. The supporting character Beans represents the archetype of the resilient ally. She is practical, observant, and skeptical of exaggeration. In narrative terms, she functions as a grounding force. Her presence challenges Rango's illusions. Rather than accepting his stories at face value, she questions them. This tension pushes him toward growth. Beans does not exist merely as a romantic interest. She embodies competence and self-reliance. Through her, the story reinforces the idea that strength can exist without spectacle. Another crucial figure is Rattlesnake Jake, who fulfills the role of the mythic antagonist. He is not a simple obstacle, but a symbolic test. In hero journey structures, the antagonist often represents the externalization of internal fear. Jake's confidence and lethal precision contrast sharply with Rango's uncertainty. His presence forces Rango to confront the difference between storytelling and genuine courage. Archetypically, Jake resembles the shadow figure, embodying traits that the protagonist must integrate or overcome. His controlled demeanor and reputation amplify the stakes of confrontation. The character arc of Rango follows a recognizable transformational pattern. He begins in a state of isolation, then enters a new world, faces trials, experiences humiliation, and ultimately returns transformed. This structure aligns with classical narrative models while remaining flexible enough to incorporate humor and satire. The humiliation phase is especially important. When Rango's false identity collapses publicly, he experiences the loss of status. In many hero stories, this moment represents symbolic death. For Rango, it is the point at which performance ends and authenticity begins. Supporting characters in the town of dirt function as collective archetypes as well. The townsfolk initially represent dependency. They project their hopes onto Rango, treating him as a savior. This reflects the archetype of the community in need of guidance. Their belief in his legend strengthens the pressure he feels to maintain the facade. This dynamic explores how societies sometimes create heroes out of necessity, regardless of the individual's readiness. As the story progresses, Rango's motivations evolve. Early on, he seeks validation. He desires applause and recognition. This aligns with the archetype of the seeker of identity. After his exile into the desert, his motivation shifts toward responsibility. This transformation marks his transition from reactive to proactive character. Instead of performing courage for approval, he begins to act with intention. Emotionally, Rango's development is subtle rather than abrupt. The film avoids sudden personality changes. Instead, growth emerges through accumulated experiences. Each challenge reshapes his understanding of himself. The narrative allows space for reflection, particularly during quieter desert scenes. These moments serve as internal chapters in his psychological journey. Bean's development also reflects archetypal movement. Although she begins as self-sufficient, her willingness to trust Rango demonstrates openness. She transitions from skepticism to partnership. This evolution illustrates the archetype of the independent warrior who chooses collaboration without losing autonomy. Her character counters stereotypes by maintaining strength throughout the story. The antagonist Jake remains relatively static, which reinforces his archetypal role. In many mythic narratives, villains do not undergo redemption arcs. Instead, they embody unyielding opposition. Jake's consistency heightens tension because he does not waver. This stability contrasts with Rango's fluid identity, emphasizing the theme of transformation. The interplay between these characters highlights the film's exploration of identity construction. Rango's arc suggests that self-definition requires action, accountability, and honesty. He does not become a hero because of prophecy, but because he chooses to align his behavior with his values. This choice distinguishes him from traditional destined heroes. The story implies that heroism is accessible rather than predetermined. Through these character dynamics, the film engages with the hero's journey framework without strictly adhering to it. There is a call to adventure, entry into an unfamiliar world, trials, confrontation with a powerful adversary, and return with new understanding. However, the film subverts expectations by emphasizing self-created identity rather than external reward. Rango does not receive magical transformation. He earns internal clarity. The archetypal balance among characters creates narrative harmony. Rango embodies change, Beans embodies resilience, and Jake embodies opposition. Together, they form a triadic structure that supports thematic exploration. This structure ensures that the story remains character-driven even during action sequences. Ultimately, the character development in Rango demonstrates how animated storytelling can reinterpret classical archetypes for contemporary audiences. By presenting flawed characters who grow through experience rather than destiny, the film reinforces messages about responsibility, authenticity, and collaboration. The evolution of its protagonist, supported by strong secondary figures, transforms what could have been a simple parody into a meaningful journey of self-discovery. In Rango, visual identity is inseparable from storytelling. The film's costumes, character designs, and environments work together to communicate history, personality, and cultural context without relying heavily on exposition. Directed by Gore Verbinski, the production team crafted a world that feels worn, dusty, and authentic, reflecting both the physical environment of the desert and the emotional states of its inhabitants. The film itself, Rango, treats design as narrative language. The character designs are intentionally unconventional. Rather than smoothing out features to create appealing symmetry, the animators embraced asymmetry, texture, and imperfection. Scales appear cracked, clothing looks weathered, and facial features emphasize individuality. This approach reinforces the harshness of the setting. The town of Dirt does not feel like a fantasy playground, but like a frontier settlement shaped by scarcity and survival. Every design choice supports that tone. Rango's physical appearance reflects his psychological journey. As a chameleon, he naturally embodies transformation, but his early design emphasizes fragility. His posture is slightly hunched, his movements uncertain. Large expressive eyes dominate his face, highlighting vulnerability. As the story progresses and he begins to accept responsibility, his stance becomes more upright. This subtle evolution in physicality mirrors his internal growth. Costume elements, such as the sheriff badge and Western attire, visually mark his transition from improviser to leader. The design of Rattlesnake Jake draws from classic Western iconography. His elongated body, coiled posture, and detailed scales create a sense of danger without exaggeration. The animators studied reptilian movement to ensure fluid realism. Jake's visual presence recalls the tension found in traditional frontier narratives, particularly those influenced by the stylistic minimalism of Once Upon a Time in the West. In that cinematic tradition, wide framing, deliberate pacing, and stark character silhouettes contribute to mythic storytelling. Rango adapts similar visual principles within animation. Environmental design plays an equally important role. The town of Dirt is constructed with uneven wooden buildings, faded signage, and improvised architecture. Nothing appears newly built. This sense of accumulated wear suggests a long history of struggle. The desert surrounding the town expands into vast open landscapes, emphasizing isolation. Wide shots highlight the smallness of the settlement against the horizon. This visual contrast reinforces themes of vulnerability and resilience. Lighting and texture contribute significantly to immersion. The animators incorporated advanced rendering techniques to simulate dust particles in the air. Sunlight interacts with surfaces realistically, casting sharp shadows during midday scenes and warm golden tones during evening sequences. This attention to atmospheric detail enhances world-building by making the environment feel physically present. The desert is not just a backdrop, it is an active force shaping behavior and mood. Costume design also reflects social roles within the town. Characters wear garments suited to survival rather than fashion. Fabrics appear faded and practical. Accessories are functional. This realism helps ground the anthropomorphic characters in a believable frontier setting. Even though the inhabitants are animals, their clothing aligns with classic Western imagery, reinforcing genre identity. The film draws visual inspiration from established Western cinema, including the stylistic intensity of the good, the bad, and the ugly. That influence can be seen in framing choices, character positioning, and the emphasis on visual tension during confrontations. Close-ups during standoffs highlight expressions, while wide angles capture the emptiness of the surrounding landscape. These techniques, translated into animation, help create cinematic depth. Color symbolism strengthens world building. The palette favors earthy browns, muted greens, and sun-washed yellows. Brighter colors are used sparingly, often reserved for moments of heightened emotion or symbolic significance. Water, when visible, stands out against the dry environment, drawing attention through contrast. This visual emphasis reinforces its importance within the story's moral framework. Facial design is another area where subtlety matters. Expressive eyes and carefully animated micro-movements allow characters to communicate thought without dialogue. Small shifts in gaze, eyelid movement, and mouth shape convey internal reactions. This precision enables scenes of quiet introspection to feel emotionally rich. The audience can read hesitation, confidence, or fear through visual cues alone. World-building extends beyond physical structures to include cultural elements. Signage, props, and background details hint at the town's economy and daily life. Tools appear handmade. Furniture shows signs of repair. These details suggest a community constantly adapting to environmental pressure. Nothing feels disposable, reinforcing themes of endurance. The integration of character and environment ensures narrative coherence. Rango's bright sheriff badge contrasts with the muted desert tones, symbolizing borrowed authority. When he first wears it, the badge appears almost too polished for the setting, highlighting the artificial nature of his role. As he grows more authentic, the badge feels less like decoration and more like responsibility. Animators also paid close attention to movement within space. Characters interact with their environment physically. Footsteps disturb sand. Doors creak. Clothing shifts naturally with motion. These details enhance immersion and create a sense of tactile realism. The film's commitment to physicality distinguishes it from more stylized animated approaches. The combination of costume, character design, and environment ultimately supports thematic storytelling. Identity is reflected visually. Transformation is shown through posture and attire. Power is communicated through framing and contrast. Rather than relying on dialogue alone, the film uses visual composition to reinforce narrative development. By blending genre homage with original design choices, Rango constructs a world that feels both familiar and distinct. The Western influences provide structural grounding, while the textured animation style gives the setting individuality. The result is a cohesive universe where every visual element contributes to meaning. The screenplay of Rango relies heavily on sharp dialogue, layered humor, and carefully structured exchanges that support both character development and thematic depth. Written by John Logan, the script balances comedy with introspection, ensuring that every joke either reveals personality or advances the story. Rather than filling scenes with rapid-fire gags, the film allows conversations to breathe, creating rhythm and tension through timing as much as through content. One of the defining features of the dialogue is its theatrical quality. Rango, voiced by Johnny Depp, speaks in exaggerated tones during the early part of the film. His lines are delivered with dramatic pauses and heightened emotion, reflecting his tendency to perform identity rather than embody it. This stylized speech pattern reinforces the theme of self-invention. When he tells stories about heroic exploits, the language becomes grandiose, almost operatic. These moments contrast sharply with his quieter admissions of doubt later in the film, where his voice softens and becomes more natural. Humor in the screenplay operates on multiple levels. For children, much of the comedy arises from physical situations, misunderstandings, and visual absurdity. Rango's awkward attempts at leadership, his exaggerated reactions, and the eccentric behavior of the townsfolk provide immediate laughter. These scenes rely on timing, facial expression, and situational irony rather than complex references. The animated medium enhances the style, allowing expressions and gestures to amplify comedic impact. For adult audiences, however, the humor often includes subtle genre references and meta-commentary. The film frequently acknowledges Western tropes while participating in them. For example, standoff sequences echo classic frontier confrontations, yet they are infused with self-awareness. This layering of parody and homage creates humor that works differently depending on the viewer's familiarity with the genre. The screenplay trusts that audiences can recognize these conventions without explicit explanation. The character of Beans, portrayed by Isla contributes significantly to comedic rhythm. Her dialogue is direct and pragmatic, often cutting through Rango's exaggerations. This contrast generates humor through juxtaposition. While Rango embellishes stories, Beans responds with skepticism or blunt practicality. The dynamic between them creates natural comedic tension that also advances the narrative. Their conversations gradually shift from confrontation to cooperation, reflecting evolving trust. Antagonistic dialogue, particularly from Rattlesnake Jake, voiced by Bill Nighy, demonstrates how the screenplay uses restraint to build intimidation. Jake's lines are delivered with calm precision. He does not need lengthy speeches to establish dominance. Instead, short statements and controlled phrasing convey authority. The contrast between his measured tone and Rango's expressive delivery heightens dramatic stakes. Silence surrounding his dialogue is often just as important as the words themselves. The screenplay also integrates humor into action sequences. Rather than separating comedy from conflict, the film blends them. Chase scenes include visual gags that unfold within high-tension moments. This integration ensures that the pacing remains dynamic. Humor does not interrupt narrative progression, it complements it. This technique resembles approaches seen in other animated comedies such as Shrek, where parody and storytelling operate simultaneously. However, Rango's tone remains more grounded and genre-specific, focusing on Western conventions rather than fairy tale structures. Exposition in the film is handled primarily through dialogue, but it is delivered in ways that feel organic. Characters reveal information during arguments, investigations, and community meetings. Rather than relying on heavy narration, the script embeds background details within interactions. This approach maintains momentum while avoiding didactic explanation. Viewers learn about the town's drought, the mayor's influence, and the water shortage through conversation that feels motivated by immediate concerns. Recurring phrases and rhetorical patterns also contribute to screenplay structure. Rango's storytelling style initially includes repetitive embellishments, reflecting his desire for attention. These repetitions function as comedic devices, but also highlight his insecurity. As the narrative progresses, repetition decreases, signaling his maturation. The evolution of speech patterns mirrors internal change, demonstrating how dialogue can reflect character arcs. The screenplay uses tension and release strategically. Scenes often build toward confrontation through escalating dialogue, only to resolve in unexpected ways. This structure keeps audiences engaged. Arguments shift tone, alliances change, and revelations alter perspectives. The pacing of conversations ensures that information is distributed gradually, maintaining suspense. Another important aspect of humor lies in self-awareness. Rango frequently references storytelling itself. His desire to craft a legend becomes part of the narrative's comedic identity. This meta layer invites audiences to reflect on how stories shape perception. By acknowledging the mechanics of mythmaking, the screenplay adds depth without sacrificing entertainment value. The film's dialogue also emphasizes themes of authenticity. Early exchanges show Rango exaggerating his abilities. Later conversations reveal humility and accountability. This transformation is communicated not through speeches about growth, but through changes in tone and content. The screenplay avoids overt moral lectures, preferring subtle progression. Supporting characters contribute to comedic world building through distinct speech patterns. Each inhabitant of Dirt has a unique vocal rhythm. This diversity makes the town feel populated and real. The ensemble dialogue scenes create overlapping conversations that enhance immersion. These moments rely on precise editing to maintain clarity, demonstrating the collaboration between writing and direction under Gore Verbinski. The screenplay structure follows a clear three-act progression, but within that framework, dialogue drives momentum. Exposition, conflict, and resolution are expressed primarily through interaction rather than narration. Humor serves as connective tissue, preventing tonal imbalance. Even serious revelations are often accompanied by subtle irony or wit. In comparison to more straightforward animated comedies, Rango's script feels closer to live-action Western dialogue, yet adapted for animation. Its pacing allows silence to speak as loudly as words. Pauses during standoffs create anticipation. Brief exchanges can carry significant narrative weight. This economy of language ensures that every line matters. Rango occupies a distinctive position in the history of animated filmmaking, especially when compared to earlier classics and other major studio productions of its era. Directed by Gore Verbinski and written by John Logan, the film reflects a creative philosophy that blends genre homage, technical innovation, and philosophical storytelling. Its approach to tone, visual design, and narrative structure can be better understood by examining how it contrasts with and builds upon previous milestones in animation. One useful point of comparison is the evolution of computer-generated animation in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Early breakthroughs from studios such as Pixar Animation Studios established the viability of fully computer-animated storytelling with films that emphasized emotional clarity, bright color palettes, and accessible humor. In contrast, Rango deliberately moves away from polished surfaces and saturated environments. Instead of presenting a clean, toy-like world, it embraces dust, shadow, and texture. This stylistic decision signals a different artistic intention. Where many animated features prioritize warmth and visual softness, Rango favors realism and atmospheric density. The film also differs in tone from traditional fairy tale adaptations produced by companies like the Walt Disney Company. Classic fairy tale animations often center on clear moral dichotomies, musical expression, and romantic arcs. While Rango contains humor and emotional growth, it avoids overt musical structures and simplified good versus evil dynamics. Its characters operate within moral gray areas, particularly in the early stages of the story. This complexity aligns the film more closely with live-action Western traditions than with conventional animated fantasy narratives. Within the realm of genre adaptation, Rango stands alongside other films that reinterpreted established storytelling forms through animation. However, few animated features before it had fully embraced the Western genre as a primary framework. Classic Western cinema, including works influenced by directors such as Sergio Leone, relied heavily on long takes, deliberate pacing, and dramatic standoffs. Rango translates these techniques into animated form, using framing, silence, and tension to recreate the feel of frontier confrontation. This fusion of Western cinematic grammar with digital animation demonstrates the medium's flexibility. Another comparison can be drawn with animated films that incorporate meta-commentary or self-awareness. Certain contemporary features explore parody and cultural reference, but Rango integrates these elements while maintaining narrative sincerity. Its references to genre conventions are not purely comedic. Instead, they serve as building blocks for character transformation. The protagonist's journey from performance to authenticity mirrors the film's own relationship with cinematic history. This layered approach distinguishes it from works that rely primarily on parody for humor. Technically, the animation achievements of Industrial Light and Magic mark a significant expansion of the studio's capabilities. Traditionally associated with visual effects in live-action films, the studio demonstrated that it could produce a fully realized animated feature with intricate lighting and environmental design. Compared to more stylized animated worlds, Rango's commitment to dust simulation, realistic shadows, and textured surfaces reflects a pursuit of tactile authenticity. This realism supports the Western setting and reinforces thematic elements of survival and scarcity. Musically, the score composed by Hans Zimmer differentiates the film from many animated contemporaries. Whereas numerous family-oriented features rely on vocal-driven songs to propel narrative, Rango uses orchestral composition to shape atmosphere. The music references Western traditions through instrumentation and rhythm rather than through lyrical repetition. This decision aligns the film more closely with epic cinematic scoring practices seen in live-action genre films. Voice performance also contributes to its unique standing. The central character, portrayed by Johnny Depp, benefits from a performance style that emphasizes character immersion rather than broad cartoon exaggeration. Compared to animated protagonists who deliver energetic, rapidly paced comedic dialogue, Rango's vocal arc evolves gradually. His performance reflects insecurity, theatricality, and eventual restraint. This progression parallels the narrative theme of identity formation. Supporting performances further strengthen the film's comparative distinction. Isla Fisher and Bill Nighy contribute grounded and nuanced vocal interpretations that enhance realism. Their performances demonstrate that animation can accommodate subtle dramatic acting rather than relying solely on exaggerated vocal caricature. This approach helps bridge the gap between animated storytelling and live-action performance traditions. When examining animated cinema over time, Rango represents a moment of tonal experimentation within mainstream production. Many family films prioritize consistent brightness, rapid pacing, and clear comedic beats. Rango, by contrast, incorporates slower sequences, contemplative pauses, and morally complex situations. Its desert exile scenes, in particular, echo the introspective rhythms of classic Western narratives. This structural choice highlights character psychology as much as external conflict. The film's visual palette also contrasts with earlier animated classics that favored vivid primary colors. By adopting muted earth tones, it reinforces thematic concerns about drought and environmental struggle. This aesthetic decision demonstrates how color theory can shape emotional interpretation. Rather than using brightness to generate excitement, the film uses contrast and shadow to build tension. In terms of storytelling philosophy, Rango reflects the broader evolution of animated cinema toward more mature thematic exploration. While maintaining accessibility for children, it integrates ideas about self-invention, leadership, and authenticity. This dual audience approach aligns with the trend of animation appealing simultaneously to younger viewers and adults. However, it does so within the framework of a Western rather than a fantasy kingdom or urban setting. Ultimately, Rango stands as an example of how animation can reinterpret established genres without losing its identity as a family film. Compared to earlier classics, it adopts a darker visual tone and a more introspective narrative style. Compared to other contemporary productions, it emphasizes genre homage and atmospheric realism over pop culture references. Through its collaboration between direction, writing, animation technology, and musical composition, the film reflects the ongoing evolution of animated storytelling.